Welcome to Margin Notes, the podcast where we dig beneath the surface of big ideas shaping our world. Today, we're diving into the fascinating rise of Silicon Valley, how it overtook Boston, how government funding, counterculture, and eccentric founders helped shape the tech capital of the world. We'll explore the messy birth of PayPal, the surprising role of Cold War defense contracts, and the complex legacy of Peter Thiel. Featuring insights from The Contrarian by Max Chafkin, The Code by Margaret O'Mara, and Valley of Genius, this episode unpacks the myths, the money, and the minds behind the Valley's rise. Let's get into it.
It's almost hard to picture now, but back in the day, Silicon Valley wasn't the automatic center of the tech universe.
Right.
Boston was really giving it a run for its money. The money, the markets, the media attention, a lot of it was focused back east.
Absolutely.
So today, we're going to dig into how the West Coast eventually, pulled ahead. We'll look at some key moments, some surprising links that really forged Silicon Valley's identity.
Yeah, think of this as your kind of inside track to understanding the forces that really built this place.
And we've got some great sources to guide us through this.
We do. We'll be pulling from Max Chafkin's The Contrarian, which gives a really deep look at Peter Thiel, and also Margaret O'Mara's The Code, which paints that broader historical picture of the Valley.
Okay.
And we'll also sprinkle in some bits from Valley of Genius, which is cool because it's firsthand stories from the people actually there.
Yeah, those firsthand accounts add so much color. And it's fascinating, even early on, the different visions people had. Like you had Peter Thiel thinking about, massive influence, almost like a Supreme Court justice level.
Mm-hmm. Quite ambitious.
Which is such a contrast to the, let's be honest, messy reality of the tech industry back then. It was still pretty nascent.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The foundations of the Valley.
Right.
There's this kind of persistent myth, isn't there, that Silicon Valley just sprang up out of pure free market capitalism.
Yeah, that's the story you often hear. But Margaret O'Mara really pushes back on that in The Code.
How so?
Well, she argues it wasn't just big government, and it wasn't just the free market. It was this really interesting mix of both.
A blend.
Exactly. And a huge piece of that early momentum came from government money, especially after Sputnik.
Ah, Sputnik, right. That really lit a fire under people, didn't it?
It did. Suddenly, there was this flood of federal funding, a national focus on catching up technologically. Right. And that had a direct, very real impact on that specific region.
Yeah.
It wasn't just inventors in garages.
No, definitely not. And Stanford University, wow, they played a huge part in this.
Oh, absolutely. Under Frederick Terman.
Terman, yes. He was incredibly strategic, wasn't he? Aligning Stanford's engineering programs directly with what the new electronics companies needed. O'Mara basically says Stanford was selling the products of the intellect.
The great phrase. And it shows how deliberate that academic industry link was. Not accidental at all.
And zooming out even further, the whole Cold War context is, fundamental.
You can't overstate it.
Mm-hmm.
Those government contracts, especially defense contracts, think Lockheed's missile program right there at Moffett Field.
Huge employer.
Massive. It fueled that early high-tech boom, pulled in tons of engineers, scientists, created a real critical mass of talent.
Yeah. I think there was even a quote predicting a greatest explosion of scientific devices around that time.
Looking back, that was pretty spot on, wasn't it?
It really was. Okay, so you have the talent, the government push, but ideas need money to grow.
And our venture capital.
Exactly. It wasn't enough just to invent something. You needed cash to scale it. O'Mara calls the VC industry a critical part of the distinctive tech-supporting Valley ecosystem. And it really started taking shape in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, initially, the investments weren't enormous by today's standards, maybe a few $100,000 here and there.
Right. Small seeds.
But incredibly impactful for those early companies. And you look at pioneers like Draper and Johnson, their first fund was actually backed by an SBAC, a small business investment company.
So even the private capital had a government link early on.
There's that blend again. It's woven through the whole story.
And there was another key difference, something specific to California law.
Ah, the non-competes, or lack thereof.
Right. Unlike Massachusetts, another big tech hub then, California courts generally didn't enforce non-compete agreements.
Which meant people could jump ship more easily, take their knowledge, their ideas, to a new startup or a rival company.
That must have accelerated things incredibly, the spread of information.
Totally. O'Mara talks about these horizontal networks. Close ties not just between companies, but also between the VCs, the lawyers, even like the popular restaurants and bars where people hung out.
So less formal, less rigid than Route 128 around Boston.
Much less hierarchical, it seems. Information just flowed more freely, horizontally, rather than staying locked up inside big company silos. A very different vibe.
Okay, let's shift gears to the personal computer. Its origins are maybe not what people expect either.
Right. You think labs, corporations. But the 60s counterculture actually played a surprisingly big role.
How did that work?
Well, for some people involved, computing felt like a way around established power, a tool for individual empowerment. Others saw it, maybe more idealistically, as a way to promote social equity. Different angles, but this anti-establishment thread was there.
So ideals meeting technology.
Kind of, yeah. A strange but potent mix.
And you can't talk early PC history without mentioning Xerox PARC.
Oh, PRC. Legendary. Their mission was basically to invent the office of the future.
And they kind of did. The graphical user interface, Ethernet, the mouse. So much foundational tech came out of there.
Incredible innovation. But then
Xerox, the parent company, didn't really know what to do with it all. Their focus was still on copiers.
right. They didn't fully grasp the revolution they'd started in their own lab. It's this classic story of inventing the future but failing to capitalize. Stuart Brand, from the Whole Earth catalog, even visited early on and saw the potential.
It really shows that innovation isn't just about the invention, it's about the vision to see where it can go.
Exactly, and the willingness to bet on it, even if it disrupts your current business.
Then comes Apple. The Apple I sounds like it was pretty basic initially.
Yeah, Valley of Genius describes it almost like a hobbyist kit, using off-the-shelf Atari parts even.
Really?
Yeah.
Atari parts?
Yeah. But then Steve Wozniak, driven by his own passion, wanting to play his arcade game Breakout at home, he creates the Apple II.
And the Apple II was a leap forward.
Huge. Color graphics, he literally figured out how to tune it to work with regular TVs. And he built the Breakout hardware right onto the board.
Just because he wanted to play it.
That's the story. It shows that early hacker, tinkerer spirit.
But it was still mostly for enthusiasts at that point, right?
It was, until the killer app arrived.
VisiCalc.
VisiCalc, the first electronic spreadsheet. Suddenly, the Apple II wasn't just a cool gadget for techies, it was a serious business tool.
That's what took it mainstream.
Valley of Genius makes that point really strongly. VisiCalc sold the Apple II to a whole new market, made personal computing practical for, regular businesses.
A classic pattern. Find that one indispensable use case.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Apple creating new things. You had talent leaving established places too, like Atari.
Ah, the Atari exodus. What happened there?
Well, you had these programmers creating games that were making Atari tons of money, blockbuster hits. But they felt undervalued, anonymous almost.
So they left?
Yep. Walked out and formed their own companies like Activision to publish their own games and get credit and better royalties. Shows how hot the early video game market was too.
Okay, let's pivot a bit and focus on Peter Thiel, a central figure in Chafkin's book. His early thinking is pretty revealing.
It really is. Even early on, Chafkin details how Thiel wasn't just thinking about being rich. He wanted serious influence, power.
Like that comparison to a Buckley or a Supreme Court justice.
Right. And he had some pretty distinct views, like seeing millionaires as morally superior, and this idea that greed was better than envy, even linking it to the U.S. winning the Cold War.
Wow, okay. And he also predicted that PC political correctness would sort of self-destruct.
Yeah, he was voicing these kinds of contrarian, maybe provocative ideas quite early. It sets the stage for understanding his later moves.
And his first big venture, PayPal. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing at the start, was it?
Oh, far from it. According to Chafkin, they were burning through cash like crazy. Something like $100,000 a day just on incentives to get users to sign up.
$100,000 a day? That's unsustainable.
Totally. Plus, they were getting hammered by credit card interchange fees and a lot of fraud. It sounds like a really precarious high-wire act.
That growth at all costs mentality we see so often.
A prime example, betting that market share now would pay off massively later.
And then there was the whole X.com drama with Elon Musk.
Right. Musk co-founded X.com, which merged with Thiel's company Confinity, which had PayPal. Musk really wanted to ditch the PayPal name and rebrand everything as X.com.
Why X?
He saw it as a bigger vision, like a full financial services portal. But Thiel's team and the users were already attached to PayPal. People were literally saying, PayPal me the money.
The brand had traction.
Huge traction. And focus groups apparently hated the X name. Some even associated it with porn sites.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. But Musk was apparently really dug in, maybe partly because he'd spent $1 million on the X.com domain name.
Stubbornness versus brand reality. Classic startup conflict.
It really highlights how important branding and market perception are, even when you have strong leaders pushing in a different direction.
Okay, moving into the early days of social networking, some interesting near misses and connections involving Thiel.
Yeah, Sean Parker, post-Napster, had started Plaxo.
Plaxo, right. Wasn't that the one known for being a bit aggressive with invites?
Chafkin calls it basically a spam machine for how it tried to grow its user base by emailing contacts.
Right.
Pretty controversial.
Okay.
And Mike Moritz, the big VC at Sequoia, actually tried to get Thiel to invest in Plaxo.
Did he?
Thiel passed initially, but he and Parker did end up becoming friends later on.
Interesting how those paths cross shows the importance of those networks.
Absolutely. These personal connections, shared experiences,
Hmm?
they really shaped things.
And then, of course, Facebook. Thiel got in early there.
Famously early. A $500,000 angel investment. Apparently, he used proceeds from his Roth IRA.
Wow. And his advice to Zuckerberg.
Legendary. Don't fuck it up.
Huh. Straight to the point. But Zuckerberg's meeting with Sequoia, Moritz's firm, that didn't go so well.
That's the story, yeah. Apparently, Zuckerberg showed up late, wearing pajamas.
Pajamas. To pitch Sequoia.
That's the legend. And supposedly had slides that were almost designed to put them off, like one just saying, Sean Parker is involved, maybe as a dig at Moritz because of the earlier Plaxo stuff.
Sounds like he deliberately blew up the meeting.
Yeah, it kind of sounds that way. And Sequoia missed out on Facebook. A huge miss. Shows the wild, sometimes disrespectful side of Valley deal-making back then.
Let's talk about Palantir, Thiel's other big company. It had a different kind of start, didn't it, funding-wise?
Yeah, very different. They actually struggled to raise money from the usual Silicon Valley VCs early on. Firms like Sequoia, Kleiner Perkins, they passed.
Really? Why?
Hard to say for sure. Maybe the government focus was unusual then, but Thiel ended up leaning on his PayPal network and, crucially, connections in Washington, D.C.
The government angle again.
Exactly. Courting figures in the Bush administration, people involved in post-9/11 surveillance efforts, like John Poindexter, who had been behind the Total Information Awareness Program.
TIA. That was pretty controversial. Privacy concerns and all that.
Very controversial.
Yeah.
But those D.C. connections, especially in intelligence and defense, became Palantir's early lifeline, set them on a very different path than a typical consumer tech company.
Switching tracks a bit, Chafkin also delves into Thiel's personal life and the Gawker situation.
Right, the lawsuit that ultimately bankrupted Gawker Media. Thiel secretly funded it.
Why? What was the background there?
Well, Chafkin suggests Thiel believed Gawker articles, particularly one that outed him, might have hurt his hedge fund, Clarium, possibly scaring off investors like Arab sovereign wealth funds who might be sensitive to that.
So a personal and financial motivation intertwine.
It seems like it. Thiel himself was pretty careful about discussing his private life publicly then. But behind the scenes, he was mounting this campaign.
And he found an ally.
Yes, Charles Johnson, who also had a major vendetta against Gawker. Once Johnson figured out Thiel was funding the lawsuits, he apparently jumped in enthusiastically. A shared enemy.
Thiel also launched initiatives that definitely fit his contrarian label, like the Thiel Fellowship.
Oh, yeah. Paying bright young people to drop out of top colleges and start companies instead.
That caused a stir.
Huge stir.
Yeah.
Thiel talked about the importance of being autodidactic, learning by doing, though the press releases definitely highlighted the prestigious universities the fellows were leaving.
A bit of having it both ways.
Maybe. Some fellows later called it a super smart PR move, which is interesting. It certainly got people talking about the value of traditional education versus entrepreneurship.
And the irony wasn't lost on people when Thiel, after dissing elite colleges, started teaching a class at Stanford.
Right. A class on startups, no less,
Right.
leveraging all his connections from PayPal, Facebook, Google.
It does show, maybe, the complex relationship even critics have with these institutions. He still saw value in being there, influencing students.
Seems that way. You engage even with things you critique.
What about his political evolution? Chafkin tracks that, too.
Yeah, his first real presidential backing was for Ron Paul back in 2007. A relatively small donation initially.
Ron Paul call.
Paul had this strong online following, especially among younger anti-establishment types. Thiel apparently saw that movement as fitting his own kind of neo-reactionary views, not just pure libertarian, but something else.
Even though Paul himself tried to distance himself from some earlier controversial stuff.
Right. Thiel saw an alignment there. And Chafkin notes this pattern with Thiel publicly softening or reinterpreting past controversial statements, like that essay questioning democracy and women's suffrage, while maybe subtly signaling he still holds similar views. The Tyler Cowen interview was cited as an example.
Interesting. This leads us to his support for Donald Trump.
Which surprised many, but Thiel later joked it was his least contrarian bet, perhaps suggesting it was a pragmatic calculation. Easier access for SpaceX, for Palantir, keeping Facebook close to the White House. Palantir even had a backup plan if Trump lost to become a subcontractor on a big Army intelligence contract, DCGS.
So hedging his bets politically?
Looks like it. Strategy alongside ideology, maybe.
How did Silicon Valley react to his Trump support?
A lot of cynicism, according to Chafkin. Many saw it purely as a play for power and access, like pay $1 million, get influence, often overlooking or downplaying any deeper ideological alignment with the alt-right elements Trump attracted.
But there's another perspective too, right?
Yeah, like Austin Russell, a former Thiel fellow, now CEO of Luminar. His take was more pragmatic. Sometimes you have to have a seat at the table to actually make changes, even if you don't agree with everyone there.
It's a recurring dilemma. Okay, so Palantir's government ties evolved too.
They did. Early on, the CIA was a key client. Under Trump, Endural, another defense tech company started by people Thiel backed, got heavily involved with Customs and Border Protection, CBP.
And CBP was implementing some very controversial policies then.
Exactly. Increased funding, the zero-tolerance policy leading to family separations, and Dural's reliance on CBP contracts put it right in the middle of that.
Shows how tech companies can get tied to shifting political winds and policies.
Definitely.
Even Facebook was doing its own geopolitical dance, wasn't it, with China?
Oh, yeah. Zuckerberg put a lot of effort into courting Chinese leaders. Learned Mandarin, gave Xi Jinping a copy of his book.
Even though Facebook was, and still is, banned in China.
Right. Thiel apparently disagreed with that outreach, thought it was pointless, and ultimately it didn't seem to achieve much. Xi even reportedly declined to give Zuckerberg's baby an honorary Chinese name at a White House dinner.
Awkward. Highlights the challenges for U.S. tech in China.
The big time.
So Thiel, in more recent years, Chafkin paints a picture of him settling into domestic life, a new child, but still very much influential.
Absolutely. Still wielding power. That 2019 meeting he had with Zuckerberg and Trump at the White House is a prime example.
And there were those worries around Facebook's Libra project, the digital currency.
Yeah, concerns that it could challenge the U.S. dollar's global dominance, which interestingly echoes some of the really ambitious, maybe disruptive original visions Thiel had for PayPal way back when.
It all comes full circle, in a way.
Sometimes it seems like it. Those early ideas can have long shadows.
What about the aftermath, say, around 2020?
Well, Thiel kept a pretty low profile publicly that year as the political climate shifted. There was that Axios article kind of blaming him for enabling misinterpretations of Trump.
Right.
But here's the twist. While his political projects seemed to be faltering, Palantir's stock valuation soared. Its market cap shot up.
Strange disconnect. Politics going one way, business going another.
It really highlights how complex the drivers are in tech valuation, not always tied directly to immediate political wins or losses.
So looking back at Thiel's legacy, Chafkin presents him as, well, complicated, full of contradictions.
Deeply contradictory. Criticizing big tech, but making it bigger. Championing privacy, but founding a surveillance giant. Talking meritocracy, but valuing loyalty. Defending free speech, but crushing Gawker.
It's a lot to unpack. Matt Stoller's take is pretty blunt, isn't it? Calling Thiel a really smart nihilist, just focused on power.
Yeah, Stoller connects it to that predator wins, maybe even the move fast and break things mentality. Power over principle, essentially.
A tough assessment, and throughout this, his key relationships were obviously vital.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Max Levchin and Reid Hoffman at PayPal, Alex Karp at Palantir. Those early collaborations clearly shaped his whole trajectory, his network.
But zooming out from Thiel, Valley of Genius reminds us there are these bigger, enduring forces at play in Silicon Valley, too.
For sure. That network effect is real. Sharp people come to be with other sharp people. It creates this constant churn of ideas and talent.
And Carol Bartz makes a great point about affordability. That big leaps often happen when powerful tech becomes cheap enough for lots of people to use.
Accessibility is key.
And there's still this, underlying optimism about what's next. Nolan Bushnell predicting robots in most homes. Hossein Rahman envisioning helpful robots like Waldo.
Yeah, despite all the controversies and complexities, that belief in technological progress, in building the future, it still seems to be a core part of the Valley's DNA, a mix of talent, money, and maybe just a willingness to try crazy things.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's definitely not a simple story, is it? Silicon Valley's rise was this messy, fascinating mix. Government money, individual drive, tech breakthroughs, that unique culture.
Yeah, we had some definite aha moments, I think. The surprising government role, the counterculture linked to PCs, how rocky the starts were for companies like PayPal, and just how multifaceted someone like Thiel is.
Absolutely.
And digging into all this history really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What's the next unexpected force that's going to reshape technology and how it affects all of us?
That's the big question.
And maybe, too, is that move fast and break things ethos. Is it ultimately sustainable? Or are we going to see a different kind of guiding principle emerge for the next era of tech?
Definitely some things for you, the listener, to chew on. It's been fascinating exploring these sources. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this episode, show us some love, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a little more flow in their life. Until next time, stay curious, stay present. See you soon.